The Zorgons had been winning for decades, but they were annihilated in days once humanity joined the war. I take another sip of whiskey, the burn reminding me of the plasma cannons that tore through alien hulls. A wide-eyed Talarian soldier approaches my bar stool, all youthful naivety and hero worship. "Henry Boyd, I heard you were there when it happened, when humanity saved us from extinction." I chuckle. "There were a lot of humans there, kid. But yeah, I flew in the First Fleet, the one that broke the Zorgons' advance and sent them scurrying." Gruss, according to his name patch, leans in eagerly. "What was it like? Our history vids say your ships were like nothing ever seen, that you saved the Talarian race." "Calm down and take a seat. Those vids get a lot wrong, but they get one thing right. Humanity was the Zorgons' worst nightmare," I say, motioning him to a stool. "See, when you birds sent that distress signal into the black, we'd barely achieved interstellar flight, didn't even know about your war. But when your ambassador showed up, well, that was an opportunity for Earth." "To establish yourselves in the galactic community?" Gruss asks. "To test our arsenal," I correct. "Humanity had nearly wiped itself out more times than I can count. War is in our bones. So when we heard about your plight, it wasn't a debate of if we should get involved, only how hard we could crush the opposition." I signal the bartender for another whiskey, then turn back to my new protege. I was a green lieutenant back then, didn't know my ass from a Zorgon's face, but I remember the dropout of warp above Talara Prime, seeing the shattered remains of your defense fleet. The Zorgons had broken through and they were pummeling your cities into dust. That is, until we showed up. Gruss's eyes widen. "My hatching clan is from Talara Prime. I grew up hearing stories of human ships darkening the sky, raining destruction on the Zorgons." "Huh? They ran like scared little rats." I slapped the bar, the memory alone enough to bring a fierce grin to my face. They expected to steamroll over humanity like they had every other species, but we gave better than we got. The Zorgons thought they knew war, but they had never fought humans. I take another long sip of my whiskey, savoring the malty burn as I continue my tale to the eager Talarian. Our first taste of real action against the Zorgons was the Battle of Kepler-7. You birds had been fighting tooth and nail for that system for months, but you were getting your asses handed to you. Outgunned, outmatched, the whole shebang. That's when we jumped in to even the odds. "Damn right they were," I say with a grin. "The Zorgons didn't know what hit 'em. Our flagship, the USS Odyssey, led the charge. We hit their lines with everything we had, railguns, plasma torpedoes, energy shields, tore through 'em like tissue paper." I lean back, memories of that first furious engagement flashing through my mind. I was in a fighter dancing through their formations. Our birds were faster, more maneuverable, and our targeting systems, leagues ahead of the Zorgons. We could outfly 'em and outshoot 'em any day of the week. "I can only imagine," Gruss says, shaking his head in amazement. "They must have been completely overwhelmed." "They had no idea how to handle us," I confirm. "Their tactics were predictable, their ships inferior. They always relied on brute force and numbers to win the day, but we had technology and skill on our side. It was like they were fighting blind." I chuckle as I remember the looks on the Talarians' faces as they watched us work. Your boys couldn't believe what they were seeing, the almighty Zorgon fleet being systematically dismantled by the new kids on the block. It was a thing of beauty. "What turned the tide?" Gruss asks, leaning forward. "I heard it was some kind of superweapon." "The Odyssey," I say with a nod. "She was equipped with a prototype weapon, something the eggheads back on Earth had cooked up. In the middle of the battle, she lined up a shot on the Zorgon flagship and let loose. One shot, one kill. Blew that ugly bastard to smithereens." I take another sip of whiskey, relishing the awe in Gruss's eyes. After that, the Zorgons lost their nerve. They started retreating, trying to regroup. But we weren't about to let up. We chased them across the system, picking off stragglers, hitting their supply lines. By the time we were done, they'd lost 80% of their forces in Kepler-7. It was a hell of a victory for us and you Talarians, and it was just the beginning. I motion the bartender for another whiskey, and take a sip before continuing my tale. See, after we kicked their asses at Kepler-7, the Zorgons finally realized they were in deep shit. We were something they'd never dealt with before, an enemy that could go toe-to-toe with them and come out on top. They were scrambling to figure out how to handle us, but we didn't give them the chance to catch their breath. I leaned forward, my eyes gleaming with the memories of those heady days. We went on the offensive, launching raid after raid deep into Zorgon territory. I'd been promoted to squadron leader by then, and my boys and we were the tip of the spear. I chuckled, shaking my head. We hit 'em where it hurt. Supply depots, shipyards, command centers. We'd swoop in fast and quiet, blast everything to hell, and be gone before they even knew what hit 'em. Crippled their supply lines, knocked out their comms, left 'em in total chaos. Gruss listens intently, his eyes wide. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. It was something else, kid. And the best part? We could see the Zorgons changing their tactics. They got cagey, defensive, stopped throwing their weight around like they used to. They were running scared. I pause, a particular memory bringing a grin to my face. There was this one raid we managed to sneak onto the bridge of a Zorgon battleship. You should have seen the look on the commander's face when we got the drop on him. This arrogant bastard couldn't believe a bunch of humans had outfoxed him and his crew. That's when I knew we had him on the ropes. I take another swig of whiskey, savoring the burn. Those raids turned the tide, Gruss. Forced the Zorgons to pull ships and troops from the front lines to protect their own asses. Weakened their whole position. It was the beginning of the end for those ugly fuckers. Boyd leans back in his chair, taking a long pull from his whiskey. He's quiet for a moment, lost in thought, before he continues his tale. With the Zorgons on the defensive, it was time for the killing blow. Our intel boys had finally pinpointed the location of their homeworld, Zorg Prime. The Talarian High Command was chomping at the bit to end this war once and for all. He describes the frenzied planning and preparation that went into the final assault. It was to be a massive joint operation with human and Talarian forces working in concert. Boyd, now a battle-hardened captain with countless victories under his belt, was tasked with a critical part of the mission. My squadron was assigned to take out the planetary defense grid. Those guns were the only thing standing between our fleet and total orbital domination. Without them, the Zorgons would be vulnerable to bombardment and ground invasion. Boyd recounts the tense approach to Zorg Prime. They had to navigate through a gauntlet of sensor nets and defense platforms, each one ready to sound the alarm at the slightest detection. It was like flying through a minefield. One wrong move, one stray emission, and the whole planet would know we were coming. But my boys and we were the best of the best. We slipped through their nets like ghosts. As they neared the defense grid's control center, they were met with fierce resistance. The Zorgons had stationed their elite guard, their most fearsome warriors, to protect this vital installation. It was a tough fight, the toughest of the war. The Zorgons threw everything they had at us, plasma cannons, hunter-killers, you name it. But we were determined to see the mission through. Failure was not an option. In a daring maneuver that would become legend in the annals of human Talarian military history, Boyd's squadron punched through the Zorgon lines. They hit the control center like a hammer, breaching its defenses and engaging the enemy in brutal, close-quarters combat. It was room to room, corridor to corridor. We fought for every inch, leaving a trail of Zorgon blood in our wake. I lost a lot of good men that day. Donovan, Riggs, Shu, they gave their lives to capture that control center. But their sacrifice wasn't in vain. We managed to disable the defense grid, opening the way for the rest of the fleet. With the planet's defenses down, the human Talarian forces launched their devastating assault. Boyd watched from orbit as the might of two races was brought to bear against the Zorgon capital. It was like watching the apocalypse unfold. The skies over Zorg Prime were filled with our ships, raining down hellfire on the cities below. The Zorgon capital burned under the onslaught, their once mighty towers crumbling to dust. Boyd pauses, his eyes distant. It was a bittersweet moment. We'd won the war, but the cost had been high. So many lives lost on both sides. But as I watched the Zorgon Empire crumble As I saw their flag torn down and ours raised in its place, I knew that we'd done the right thing. We'd brought peace to the galaxy, ensured the safety and freedom of countless worlds. He drains the last of his whiskey and sets the glass down with a heavy thunk. The Shadow War was brutal, kid. More brutal than anything that came before. Krang was one mean son of a bitch, had no qualms about targeting civilians, burning whole colonies to ash. Boyd's knuckles whiten around his glass. I remember one raid on a Talarian settlement. By the time we arrived, it was too late. Buildings gutted, bodies in the streets. Krang's calling card. His jaw tightens. But it was the fear, Gruss. That was Krang's real weapon. He wanted the Alliance to know that nowhere was safe, that he could strike any time, anywhere. Boyd shakes his head. It was psychological warfare at its worst. Our people were terrified, jumping at shadows. Morale was in the gutter. But we didn't give up. Couldn't give up. We went after Krang with everything we had, surveillance drones, deep cover agents, the works. The bartender slides him a fresh whiskey. Boyd nods his thanks and takes a long pull. It was like a game of cat and mouse across a dozen star systems. We'd uncover one of Krang's cells, take 'em out, but 2 more would pop up in their place. He rubs his eyes, the weariness of those days still heavy on his shoulders. Weeks turned into months, months into years. It was a war of attrition and we were bleeding. But bit by bit, raid by raid, we were chipping away at Krang's operation. I led the strike team that finally cornered Krang. Tracked the bastard to a bunker complex on some godforsaken moon. Thought he was safe. Thought we'd never find him. Boyd's eyes narrow as he recounts the treachery that nearly doomed the galaxy. Krang getting his claws on that doomsday device was a gut punch. We'd fought so hard, sacrificed so much, only to have victory snatched away by traitors in our own ranks. He shakes his head, anger simmering beneath his words. Those Talarian turncoats, they handed Krang the keys to Armageddon. With that superweapon, he could hold the entire galaxy hostage. Boyd's fist clenches around his glass. When Krang broadcast his ultimatum demanding our surrender, I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. Soldiers, civilians, didn't matter. They all knew what that madman was capable of. Boyd describes the frantic race to locate Krang's stronghold. We worked around the clock, chasing down every lead, squeezing every informant. Sleep became a luxury we couldn't afford. He chuckles mirthlessly. I lost count of the cups of coffee I drank, the stims I popped just to keep going, but it paid off. We finally got a solid intel on Krang's location, a hidden base on a desolate moon. Boyd's expression turns grim, but we knew it wouldn't be easy. Krang was expecting us. He wanted us to find him, to walk right into his trap. He leans forward, his voice low and intense. He was planning to lure us in and then obliterate us with the superweapon, wipe out the Alliance's best fighters in one fell swoop. Boyd shakes his head. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. But what choice did we have? If we didn't stop Krang, billions would die, entire worlds would burn. He describes the assembly of the strike team, the best of the best from both human and Talarian forces. We all knew the odds, knew that many of us wouldn't be coming back. But not a single man or woman hesitated. They were ready to lay down their lives for the greater good. As the strike team neared the fateful moon, Boyd couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. It felt like we were flying into the jaws of death itself, but we steeled ourselves, knowing that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. He looks up at Gruss, his eyes haunted yet defiant. And so, with a prayer on our lips and fire in our hearts, we descended into the belly of the beast, ready to face our destiny, whatever it might be. Boyd's eyes are distant as he recounts the desperate assault. As our dropships hit the moon's surface, all hell broke loose. Krang's forces opened up with everything they had, plasma cannons, missile batteries, you name it. The sky was on fire. He takes a shuddering breath. We pushed forward under the barrage, leaping from crater to crater. I saw good men and women cut down left and right, but we couldn't stop. We had to reach that base. As they neared the stronghold's perimeter, the fighting intensified. Krang's elite guard met us head-on, big bastards, each one armed to the teeth. They crashed into our lines like a tidal wave. Boyd's fist clenches at the memory. It was brutal, Gruss. The worst close-quarters fighting I've ever seen. We were grappling with the Zorgons in the trenches, tearing at each other with knives and bare hands when the guns ran dry. He shakes his head. The Talarians, they were in their element. I saw one rip a Zorgon's throat out with his beak, savage but effective. Boyd himself was in the thick of it, his power armor and pulse rifle evening the odds. I blasted my way through, stepping over the bodies of friends and foes alike. The ground was slick with blood, but we kept pushing. We had to reach the super weapon. Inch by bloody inch, they fought their way into the heart of the base. The corridors were a maze of death, each corner hiding a new horror. Finally, they burst into the central chamber, and there, waiting for them, was Krang himself. And it was a colossus, Gruss, the biggest Zorgon I'd ever seen. He had this cruel grin on his face as we approached, like he knew something we didn't. Krang spread his arms wide, his voice booming off the metal walls. Welcome, humans. You're just in time to witness the end of your pitiful alliance. He gestured to the massive device behind him, all coiled wires and pulsing energy. Behold the instrument of your destruction. In a matter of minutes, this weapon will fire, and your fleets, your worlds, will be nothing more than dust. Boyd raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. Not if we stop you first, you son of a bitch. Krang laughed, a harsh grating sound. You can try, human, but you'll have to go through me. He ignited his plasma blade, the sizzling red beam casting hellish shadows across his face. His elite guard fanned out, weapons trained on the strike team. Boyd glanced at his comrades, humans and Talarians united in this final stand. They all knew the odds, knew this was likely a one-way trip, but they weren't backing down. And with that they charged. The chamber erupted into a storm of fire and blood. Pulse rounds and plasma bolts crisscrossed in a deadly web. Soldiers on both sides fell, their cries lost in the din of battle. Boyd weaved through the chaos, his sights set on Krang. The Zorgon general met him head-on, his blade clashing against Boyd's armored gauntlets. They traded blows in a whirlwind of steel and sparks, each seeking an opening, a weakness to exploit. Krang was fast, far faster than his bulk suggested. His blade was a blur, a searing lance that threatened to pierce Boyd's defenses. But Boyd was relentless, driven by a fierce determination. He parried and struck, giving as good as he got. Around them the battle raged, a cacophony of desperation and valor. I'll admit Krang was good, better than good. He had me on the back foot, forcing me to give ground, but I couldn't yield. Too much was at stake. Boyd's eyes blazed with the memory. Our blades locked, our faces inches apart. I could feel his breath hot and rancid. He snarled, called me a fool for opposing him. He leans forward, his voice low. But that's when I saw it, Gruss. A flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew we wouldn't stop, that we'd fight to our last breath to stop him. Boyd's grip tightens on his empty glass, and that's when I knew I had him. With a roar of primal rage, Krang wrenched his arm free from my grasp and swung his fist at my face. Pain exploded in my jaw as the blow connected, stars flashing in my vision. But I pushed through it, retaliating with a flurry of strikes to his midsection. We traded blows back and forth, our armor dented and sparking from the impacts. Krang's strength was monstrous, each hit threatening to shatter bone. But I fought on, driven by desperation and the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything. Our battle raged across the chamber, smashing control panels and sending sparks flying. In the background, the hum of the superweapon grew louder, the vibrations rattling my teeth. Time was running out. In a last-ditch effort, I launched myself at Krang, grappling him around the waist. We crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, rolling and struggling for dominance. His claws raked across my armor, leaving gouges in the metal. I managed to wrap my legs around his torso, locking my ankles. With a surge of strength I squeezed, compressing his ribcage. Krang thrashed and roared, his struggles growing weaker as I cut off his air supply. "It's over, you bastard," I growled through gritted teeth, pouring every ounce of my remaining strength into the hold. Krang's eyes bulged, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. His claws scrabbled weakly at my legs, then fell still. I held the pressure a moment longer, ensuring he was truly unconscious, then released my grip and staggered to my feet. The room spun around me, my body screaming with pain and exhaustion, but I couldn't rest yet. The superweapon's hum had reached a fever pitch, the floor shaking beneath my feet. Then through the haze of pain, I remembered a conversation with a Talarian engineer. She had mentioned a failsafe, a last resort shutdown mechanism. I scanned the panel frantically, searching for the switch she had described. There, a large red button set apart from the others. I slammed my fist down on it, putting all my remaining strength into the motion. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a whine of powering down systems, the superweapon fell silent. The vibrations ceased, the flashing lights faded. I sank to my knees, relief and exhaustion overwhelming me. We had done it. Against all odds, we had stopped Krang and saved the galaxy. But as I looked around the devastated chamber, at the still forms of my fallen comrades, the weight of our losses hit me like a physical blow. So many brave souls, human and Talarian alike, had given their lives for this victory. Grief and pride warred within me as I knelt there amidst the wreckage. We had achieved the impossible, but the cost had been high, too high. I closed my eyes, sending a silent prayer for the fallen. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten, not as long as I drew breath. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. There was still work to be done. The battle was won, but the aftermath awaited, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the scars of this war would linger long after the last shot was fired. The weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders as I limped out of the chamber, leaving the broken remains of the superweapon and our fallen heroes behind. A new chapter was beginning, one of rebuilding and healing, and I would face it the same way I had faced everything else, with grim determination and an unshakable will, for that was the human way, the only way I knew. Boyd leans heavily on his comrades as they help him limp out of the ruined chamber. His body is battered, his armor scorched and dented, but his spirit is unbroken. Around them, the base is in chaos, the once pristine corridors now littered with debris and the bodies of the fallen. It was a scene straight out of hell, Boyd recounts, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. Everywhere you looked there was destruction, death, but we had won. Against all odds, we had stopped Krang and saved the galaxy. In the days that follow, the Human-Talarian Alliance works tirelessly to secure the base and begin the process of recovery. Soldiers sweep through the corridors, rounding up the remnants of Krang's forces. Many surrender without a fight, their will to resist broken by the defeat of their leader. As the prisoners are led away, teams of scientists and engineers descend upon the chamber housing the superweapon. They pore over the alien technology, trying to unravel its secrets. They wanted to understand it, to make sure that nothing like it could ever be built again, Boyd explains. But there were also those who saw its potential, who argued that we should keep it, use it as a deterrent against future threats. The debate rages in the halls of power, as political leaders and military commanders grapple with the implications of their victory. Some push for the superweapon to be preserved, a tool to ensure peace through the threat of annihilation. Others insist that it must be destroyed, that no one species can be trusted with such power. It was a tense time those days after the battle, Boyd says, shaking his head. Everyone had an opinion, a vision for what the future should look like, but in the end, cooler heads prevailed. A compromise is reached, a middle ground between those who would wield the superweapon and those who would see it erased from existence. The device is carefully dismantled, its components separated and scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy. Each piece was placed under the watchful eye of a joint Human-Talarian task force, Boyd explains. It was a symbol of our commitment to peace, to ensuring that the horrors of the war would never be repeated. As the galaxy slowly begins to rebuild, the heroes of the battle are celebrated. Boyd and his comrades are awarded medals of valor, their names inscribed in the history books as the saviors of the Alliance. "It was an honor to be recognized for what we had done," Boyd says, a hint of pride in his voice. "But I knew that the real heroes were the ones who didn't make it back, the ones who gave their lives so that others might live." As Boyd's words trail off into silence, he lowers his gaze to his empty glass, his weathered face etched with the scars of memory. The bar around him seems to fade away, the chatter of patrons and clink of glasses receding into the background as he loses himself in thought. "The war changed all of us," he says quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "Those of us who survived, we came back different, haunted by what we'd seen, what we'd done." He looks up at Gruss, his eyes shadowed. "I saw good men, friends, break under the strain. Some turned to the bottle, trying to drown out the nightmares. Others, they couldn't handle it, ate their own guns or just faded away." Boyd shakes his head. "The Alliance, they tried to help, set up counseling, support groups, but for a lot of guys it was too little, too late. The damage was done. Something inside them had shattered, and no amount of talking or therapy could put it back together." He pushes away from the bar, standing with a grunt. "Even now, years later, I still feel it. That emptiness. Like something was ripped out of me in that war, and I've been trying to fill the hole ever since." Boyd begins to pace, his steps slow and measured. "I've roamed the galaxy, seen things you wouldn't believe, wonders that take your breath away and horrors that freeze your soul. And through it all, I've come to realize that the universe is a complicated place. It's not black and white, good and evil. It's all shades of gray blurring together." Boyd reaches for his jacket, shrugging it on with a sigh. "Anyway, that's my story, the real story, not the shiny version they put in the history books. It's messy and it's painful, but it's the truth. And I think it's important that people know it. Know what really happened out there and what it did to those of us who lived it." He looks at Gruss one last time, his expression unreadable. "Because in the end, that's all we have. The truth of our experience, the reality of what we went through. And if we don't remember it, if we don't learn from it, then what was it all for?" With those final words, Boyd turns and walks away, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor of the bar. He doesn't look back, doesn't hesitate. He simply keeps walking, a solitary figure bearing the invisible wounds of a war long ended, but never forgotten. Gruss watches him go, a mix of emotions playing across his face: respect, sorrow, a hint of fear. Boyd's story has touched something deep within him, a chord of recognition and understanding. He knows that he'll carry this moment with him, the memory of a haunted man and his unflinching testament to the realities of war. Around him, the bar continues its muted bustle, the patrons unaware of the history that has just been spoken in their midst. But for Gruss, the world has shifted, his perspective altered by the words of a soldier who had seen the true face of conflict and lived to bear its scars. He sits in silence, nursing his own drink, his mind churning with the implications of Boyd's tale. The war with the Zorgons had been a defining moment for the galaxy, a crucible that had forged a new era of peace and cooperation. But it had also been a trial by fire, a searing experience that had left its mark on all who had passed through its flames. As he ponders this, Gruss can't help but feel a sense of gratitude mixed with the solemnity of the moment. Gratitude for the sacrifices of Boyd and his comrades, for the courage and strength they had shown in the face of unimaginable adversity, and gratitude for the chance to hear their story, to bear witness to the truth of their experience. For he knows that it is only by remembering, by confronting the hard realities of the past, that they can hope to build a better future, a future where the lessons of the war are not forgotten, where the bonds forged in battle are tempered by wisdom and understanding. With a sigh, Gruss finishes his drink and stands, ready to face the challenges of that future, armed with the knowledge of what had come before. He steps out into the bustling street, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders, but his step unbowed. The galaxy awaits, and he will meet it with the courage and determination of those who had gone before, those who had fought and bled and endured, so that others might live in peace. As he walks, the memory of Boyd's haunted eyes and somber words follows him, a reminder of the cost of that peace and the duty of those who inherit its blessings. It is a burden he accepts gladly, a responsibility he will bear with pride and resolve. For he is a child of the Alliance, an heir to the legacy of sacrifice and resilience that had brought them through the crucible of war. And he knows that, no matter the challenges that lie ahead, no matter the darkness that may threaten, they will endure. They will stand fast and stand together, united by the bonds of shared struggle and the unshakable conviction that, in the end, light will always triumph over shadow. It is a conviction that burns bright within him as he strides forward, ready to take his place among the guardians of the galaxy's hard-won peace, ready to honor the memory of those who had gone before, and to carry their legacy into the future. Ready, come what may. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.